I'm the Wrangler today.
All right, yeah. We got a Devil's hat. Right.
Yeah.
They just not love.
Ranger fan?
No, I don't want to say I'm from Philadelphia.
Philly? Yeah. Okay. It's okay. I'll go easy on you.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So, tell us how
how are you?
I don't want to interrupt. Tell us how Forever came about.
The origin of the idea? I was putting my 5-year-old son to bed one night, and he said, "Daddy, are you ever going to die someday?" It's like 5-year-olds will ask. And so I didn't want to upset him, so I said, no, I'll never die. Then I thought about it, and I realized, you're supposed to build trust through honesty and all that kind of stuff. So I said, all right, I wasn't completely truthful with you. I will die someday, but it won't be for a very long time, and by then you'll probably want me. At which point he burst into tears. My wife came running into the room. I was banned from the room, and she took over raising our children. But then I started to kind of play with that idea, and like, what if a character wouldn't or couldn't die? Like all the incredible things that they could do with immortality, how great it would be. And then I started to think, but what if my son wasn't immortal as well? Would the pain of watching him grow old and die, friends and family, be more of a curse than a blessing? Right. And so that was the original idea. The idea was to take a character that kind of had the thing that we all wanted, right, and sort of say it's not great, it's terrible. And then the rest of it kind of fell into place where you say, okay, well, what would that character do for a living? And I like the idea that he had been a doctor, like a person of science his whole life. But I figured maybe he would have sort of hung up his hat at this point. And so he, works at the ME's office as a way to study bodies to try and figure out anything he can to get out of this. And then, the sort of procedural element came from that, and flashbacks to his life and all that kind of stuff.
Do you think it's important for Henry to ever find out what the cause of this is, or should it just? Do you have a plan for him to ever really discover?
I have a plan for it, and I have different ideas of things he will learn. But there's a part of me in my nature that is I like this sort of Sisyphean version of it, where he's constantly pushing the boulder up the hill, but he never quite gets there. So he will certainly learn more about his affliction, and in the pilot and in subsequent episodes we learn that there's another person out there.
Right.
Does that person really have it?
Right.
Are they messing with him?
Right.
Who is that person? And that's a really fun character for us to explore that we do throughout season 1.
Sorry, so after you terrified your son.
Yes, yeah.
You traumatized him for life.
Yes, exactly. Therapy bills to follow.
What got ABC to pick this up? Like, how did that happen?
To shoot the pilot or to air it as a series?
To pick it up, to shoot the pilot, to air it as a series. Like, how did?
So the process was basically, it was pretty much the standard television process in the sense that I came up with the pitch, and then you go around to all the networks and you're like, this is what I'd like to write, and then they buy it, and they buy it as a pilot. So you write the script, wrote the script, and sold it to ABC, and then wrote the script, and they really were great throughout the whole. Like sometimes you get tons of notes, and there's always like that first call when they read the first draft, and you kind of sense they're like, okay, so we really like the concept, and then you're like, oh shit, and on this one they were like, we really like the script, and you're like, all right, great. So that you're on the same page with them, and ABC as a network doesn't do a lot of like non-ABC studio stuff, and it's a Warner Brothers show, so there was a little bit of nervousness around that. But then they picked it up, and we cast it and shot it, and the pilot tested really well, and we were lucky enough for them to air it.
You mentioned the mystery caller. When will you touch back with that?
So I'm just trying to remember what's aired, what we've shot here. So the first 2 episodes we sort of deal with the anonymous caller. He's very much in the pilot, and then he calls at the end of the second episode. He makes a reappearance in episode 6. So that's not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. We do an episode where there's a Jack the Ripper copycat out there, which allows us to do flashbacks to like 1880s London where the original Jack the Ripper murders were happening, and we found that was actually in reality the origin of the medical examiner profession. So we have a fun flashback story where Henry's brought in by the police to look at the original Jack the Rippers. The first time they sort of utilized doctors to look at a crime scene. And in that episode, the anonymous caller comes back. And without giving too much away, he kills him.
So you're co-exec producer on this too, right?
I'm sorry?
Co-executive producer or
I think I'm executive.
executive producer. Awesome. So there aren't just beautiful casting choices in this, there are also beautiful design choices in tech. And the tech crew is obviously really skilled as well, so how did you put all of that together?
Thank you for mentioning that. We worked really hard on the visual look of the show, and we're constantly tweaking and refining our sets and our locations. And you know, I'm someone that like. There's different visual styles that we want. That's why I liked Brad Anderson so much, who directed the pilot, who directed like The Machinist, and he has like a really beautiful visual eye. And then we've got different locations like our lab, where you know it may not actually make legitimate scientific sense, as our ME consultant informs me constantly, but I like shiny, like colorful liquids in the background constantly. So you'll see these like kind of well lit like brains and eyeballs and things that he explains to me would never be in an ME's lab, but I just like the way they look. Or Henry's underground lair has a certain sort of, you know, warm yellow, orangey, like really antique-y textured look. And then we've got the precinct, which is a little bit more gritty. So yeah, we work hard, and we have an unbelievable crew in New York. From our production designer, line producer, wardrobe, props, everyone like works really, really hard on, you know, all the period stuff, especially getting that right.
Sure. Matt, in coming up with the...
I'm sorry, last question.
Okay, so this is a two-parter. In coming up with the concept...
Yes, the Eagles, yes, the Flyers.
In coming up with the concept for the show, the idea of immortality has been used obviously in television before. What shows did you look at? I know New Amsterdam had a somewhat similar plot.
Yeah.
Did you look at that? Like, what other shows?
You know, I didn't. As I was saying, I sort of came up with it in the confines of my child's bedroom.
Yeah.
And then, as, you know, over time, you write this stuff, and people are like, what about New Amsterdam? And I'm like, what the fuck is New Amsterdam?
Yeah.
And then, you know, it was obviously a show on Fox that I looked up and investigated. But what I'll say is, and I've said this before, is that when you were asking about the process of pitching the show, I pitched it to all the networks. And Fox actually bid the strongest on the show, financially, over ABC. So, you know, obviously they felt comfortable with getting into this world again. So, and you know, Highlander, we actually do a Highlander joke in an episode where Lucas, the lab assistant, like mentions, like they find a sword, he's like Highlander, and it's like, what the hell's Highlander? So we'll do some fun kind of wink-winky stuff with that. But I read more about, there's actually like a lot of non-fiction books right now about immortality and man's desire to live forever and all of that kind of stuff. So I studied a lot of that. There's this thing called the immortal jellyfish, which is a real jellyfish that...
It's immortal.
It's immortal, and we had very painful for me, but speaking of like the look of the show, in Henry's lab, in like his basement lab, we had this huge, beautiful immortal jellyfish that amazingly we killed during the pilot. We killed the immortal jellyfish, and so we had this sort of CGI one, and it's been in 3 episodes, and then you know you cut the episodes together and you don't have time. And the one thing that I love is like there's this beautiful shot of Henry feeding his immortal jellyfish and talking about like how emotionally they're connected, even though it doesn't have a heart or a brain, and it's never made a cut. So someday it will be in there. But in answer to your question, I studied a lot of like the nonfiction stuff.
And just real quick, whenever there's...
We gotta take him.
Oh, sorry. On the
Thank
run.
you.
I'll answer it on the run.
Thanks.